In this video, I'm going to talk about the difference between agroecosystems and natural ecosystems. It is a question I received from my students this week, and I just wanted to share with you my answer because it's very interesting to see how we treat ecosystems differently, and we have to be mindful of that. So I'm going to show you some pictures to start with. So there we go. We're going to have this one right here. Perfect. So here is a forest with a path not very far from where I live. You could see that the path allows people to walk on it and to keep the ecosystems as pristine as possible. So here we have trees growing. As they're getting older or branches falls, at the end of the fall, we have leaves coming down. All the nutrients are being recycled in this ecosystem, which is good. So we have the sun coming in, it creates new matter, and then it falls down. So we have here at the bottom, we have humus. So we have rich soil being growing over the centuries. So that is amazing. However, when humans are coming in, we have more and more humans on the planet. Therefore, we need more and more room, and we need more and more food. So when that's the case, then humans need to find a way to better treat their ecosystems so that we can have a long-term view of what we can do with them. So I'm going to show you another example right here. Perfect. So here we have, so this is part of a provincial park not very far from where I live. And here it's an old farm from the end of the 1800s. So they transform it into a park, but they still grow hay because they have a few animals. So what's happening here? You had a forest, they cut this area, and once a year, the grass grows, and then they cut the grass and they use the hay for the animals. So what happens is every year, the grass grows. The grass are using nutrients from the soil, so potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen molecules so that it can grow, and also micronutrients in the soil to grow. So what happens is that at the end of the season, the hay is taken out. So this is what we call taking biomass out of the area. So we have plants that are growing. When they're grown, we cut them and we take away a mass of organic matter. So we take biomass out. But by taking biomass out, what happens is that all the nutrients that were once in the soil that are now in the plants are taken out of the environment. Now, this is something where they cut the grass once a year. I know because I've been going to that park for decades. So what happens is that this is a slow process. This is a prairie. They never plow this field. It's like a field area. The soil is protected. They never, so by never plowing it, it doesn't disturb it. So the clay, the sand, the silt, all the soil here, even though it's giving an output of nutrients, what happens is that it's still fairly balanced. And this is what we are looking for in an agro ecosystem. So here we go. So we have natural ecosystems where we can have trees and prairies, and then we have a soil that is being recycled, and with the long term, it's very healthy. When you have an agro ecosystem, you're in a place where you may have grass like a prairie, and what happens is that you are taking some of the plants away, and then what happens, because it's a slow process, maybe you might do the rotation of a culture. So instead of doing hay all the time, so this one here is a slow process. If you have a farm, you can have, for example, wheat 1 year, then you can do soil another year, and then you can see clover another year. So by changing the type of plants you're growing, what happens is that each of these plants are taking different nutrients from the soil. So the soil stays fairly healthy, and it's quite important. The big issue when you have an agro ecosystem is you need to be mindful for an ecosystem to stay great for as long as possible. And on top of that, if, for example, you have an organic farm, you can put manure here on the surface to help continue to have a soil that is very rich. Now, when this change is that if you have monoculture and you have intensive farming. So let's see, if you have intensive farming like this. So when you have intensive farming, let's see if I can find a picture. I had a picture from the net earlier. There we go. So we have here intensive farming. So when it's intensive is that we are planting always the same plants over and over again that are using the same nutrients over and over again. So what is the consequence of that? So let's say that you are putting wheat like this, but you're not using rotation of culture. What happens is that you have your wheat like this that are using nutrients from the soil. So what happens is that when you harvest the wheat at the top, which is great, but you also dry the stems and do straws, and you harvest the straw. What happens is that the nutrients that were used in the plants, what happened is that there's a decrease in the level of the soil right here. And the reason why is that it took some nutrients to grow the plant. What do you do the following year? You do the wheat again intensively. And what you do is that you cut the wheat at the top, you take the straw here, but because those plants grow and you take the biomass out, then there's a few millimeters of soil that goes away over time. So if you do this a few years, it's not the end of the world. A few decades, several decades. So what happens is that every time you have your field and you take the wheat, you take the straw, and what happens is that the level here of the soil will go down. And the reason for that is that you have taken nutrients out and biomass out. So there's a decrease in the volume of available soil, therefore a decrease in the volume of nutrients available. And this is compared to what we had in an environment where we are not taking any biomass out. So that means here that you're trying to do, again, your wheat, but then you realize that it's not growing as fast. And the reason for that is that the nitrogen content has gone down, the phosphorus content has gone down, the potassium content has gone down, and all the other micronutrients in the soil. So what do? We are using what we call chemical fertilizers. So we're gonna go and buy chemical fertilizers that contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium like this, so that we can here grow our field like this. But what we have to keep in mind is that we can add those macronutrients, but when we take the biomass out, what happens is that it's possible that the soil may not go down as much, but here you had this added macronutrients, but all the micronutrients, so that means the other nutrients in the soil that are no longer there or have been extracted for decades. What happened is that you have, for example, copper, magnesium, calcium, and you have boron. You have a lot more of these micronutrients that used to be there, but their quantities keep on getting down. But that's okay, because people say, well, let's add fertilizers, which is man-made, and we are adding chemicals to maximize growth. But sometimes we say, well, the food is great, but the food is not as nutritious as it used to be. And the reason for that is that as we are using fields and we are doing intense farming, everything is mechanized now when you have a monoculture. So what happened is that we are playing with the agroecosystems. We no longer respect it as much, and therefore we have to do a few things that may not be as sustainable. The question you may have is, how do we take care of that? That's a good question. The number of people on the planet is increasing all the time. Well, we have to be there for humans. But all those humans need food, and on top of that, we need space for us to build houses and places to live. So that means that areas of farming can decrease as we go along. There's more output that is needed. So we do need to be mindful about how we can be more proactive to have sustainable agro ecosystems. Would I be able to change that? Unlikely. Will you? Well, if you have contacts, connections, you want to be a farmer, or you want to be someone studying soil, improving the environment, I believe in you. And all we can do at this point is take care of our land. Second, as a consumer, you could decide on the type of food that you are eating so that you can help with the environment as much as possible. And that is the last segment for this live today. If you have any questions or clarification questions, put them in the comments below. If you haven't joined our channel and not subscribed yet, it's a great time to do so. And I'm going to put here a link to another science video, and I'll see you there to learn more things.